The auction yard buzzed with a cacophony of sound. Boots kicking up dust, metal gates clanging, voices calling bids, and horses snorting uneasily in their pens. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds, already warming the cracked earth. Among the rugged men and sharply dressed buyers, a young girl stood out, not by design, but because everything about her seemed too soft, too quiet for such a place. Her name was Clara, and she was 15. She clutched her grandfather's hand tightly, her eyes scanning the pens as they moved between the enclosures. Horses of every kind shifted behind rusted bars, some with dull eyes resigned to their fate, others pacing nervously, ears twitching at the noise. Clara's chest tightened with each one they passed. "You sure you want to do this?" her grandfather, Hank, asked in a gravelly voice. An old rancher who had seen better years, both in health and fortune. Hank watched her intently. Clara nodded, barely speaking. Her dark hair was tied back in a low braid, and her jeans were still stained from the early morning chores, but there was a fire in her eyes that belied her quiet demeanor. Hank stopped beside one of the farthest pens, marked with a crooked, handwritten sign. Lot 129, Caution Wild. No refunds. Inside stood a horse unlike any other Clara had seen. Tall and black as a thundercloud, the stallion stood rigid, his body coiled like a spring. Scars ran along his flanks, and his eyes, those eyes were wild and bottomless. They didn't look at you so much as through you. "That's the one," Hank asked, brows furrowed. Clara nodded again. A handler noticed them staring and approached, shaking his head before they could speak. "You don't want that one, Mississippi, trust me." For grown men couldn't get a halter on him. He kicks like a demon and won't let a soul get near him. "What's his name?" Clara asked, stepping slightly closer. "Name?" The handler scoffed. "He ain't got one. Thing's more beast than horse. Came down from the high desert a few months ago. Must have fought off cougars or worse out there. Broke a man's ribs first week here." Clara didn't flinch. She stared at the stallion, and for the briefest moment he stilled. His ears didn't pin back, and his breathing slowed. Then, just as suddenly, he jerked his head away, striking the bars of the pen. Hank noticed the moment too, but said nothing. Instead, he rested a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Let's see how the bidding goes." The auction began within the hour. A line of trailers and buyers crowded around the main ring. Horses were led in one by one, some prancing nervously, others drugged into calmness. The auctioneer's voice barked out numbers with mechanical precision, its rhythm clashing against the cries of animals being sold off like forgotten tools. Clara sat beside Hank, still silent. Each sale made her stomach turn, especially the younger ones, barely trained, bought in bulk by kill buyers who would ship them out of state. She knew what happened to horses that didn't sell. The stallion from Lot 129 had no chance if no one placed a bid, and it seemed no one would. By the time his number was called, most buyers had lost interest. The handlers didn't even try to lead him into the ring. Instead, they opened the pen gate from a distance, using long poles and loud whistles. The horse stormed in, kicking up dust and dragging chains. He reared, screamed, then charged at the perimeter fence, rattling the metal as the crowd gasped and stepped back. The auctioneer laughed nervously. "Lot 129, folks. Who dares?" No one spoke. Murmurs filled the silence. Someone in the back yelled, "Put that monster down before someone gets hurt." Clara stood up. Hank turned to her. "Clara," but she was already walking. Every step echoed louder in her ears as the crowd parted. The auctioneer blinked in surprise when she climbed up beside him. "I'll bid," she said clearly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some laughed, others stared in disbelief. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "Miss, are you sure?" $100, Clara said. "Girl, that ain't a horse. That's suicide," a nearby man muttered. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "We have $100. Any others?" "No. Going once, going twice." "Let her have it," someone called sarcastically. "Sold to the young lady brave enough to take him." The gavel fell. The crowd clapped mockingly. A few even whistled. Clara stood motionless, staring at the beast still thrashing in the ring. Her legs felt like jelly, but she didn't retreat. Hank met her at the bottom of the steps, lips pressed tight. "What's your plan now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I couldn't let them kill him." They waited hours for the crowd to disperse and the handlers to calm the stallion enough for transport. Hank had brought his old trailer, not expecting to use it. They had to back it up close to the pen and open the rear gate, then use a system of boards and grain trails to coax the horse inside. It took nearly an hour and 3 close calls, but finally he was in, panting, furious, eyes ablaze. The ride home was dead quiet. Clara sat in the bed of the truck, her heart hammering against her chest. Hank drove in silence, knuckles white on the wheel. When they arrived at the ranch, they backed the trailer into the small corral behind the barn. The stallion came out like a storm, hooves slamming against the ramp, nostrils flaring, tail high. He ran in frantic circles, testing the fence line again and again. Clara watched from behind the barn door, unsure what to do next. Hank came up beside her, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He handed her one. "That horse is going to break something," he muttered. "Maybe," she said. They watched in silence for a while. "You want to tell me why this horse?" Hank finally asked. Clara thought for a long moment. "Because I saw something in his eyes." He wasn't just scared. He was angry. Angry at everything, like he'd been let down too many times. Hank raised an eyebrow. "You relate to that?" She looked away. "Maybe." Hank sighed and sipped his tea. "You know what you're up against?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm not going to give up on him, no matter how long it takes." Her voice was soft but certain. Hank didn't argue. He knew that tone. He'd used it himself once, decades ago, when he'd fought to keep the ranch after his wife died. It wasn't youthful fantasy. It was stubborn hope. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She crept out of the house and made her way to the corral, climbing onto the top rail quietly. The moon cast silver light across the dirt, and the stallion stood in the far corner, his breath rising in clouds. She didn't speak. She just sat there, watching him. An hour passed, then 2. At one point, the stallion looked up and stared at her. Their eyes locked again, and once more he didn't flinch. He didn't come closer, but he didn't look away either. Clara whispered, "You don't have to trust me yet, but I'm here." The wind rustled the trees gently. Somewhere a coyote howled in the distance. And the stallion, for the first time since entering the corral, lay down, not close, not relaxed, but down. A silent signal that maybe, just maybe, he was willing to listen. Clara smiled to herself and rested her chin on her knees. Tomorrow would be the real test, but tonight a seed had been planted, and under the moonlight, amidst dust and silence, a girl and a horse, both untamable in their own way, had taken the first impossible step. The morning after the auction, Clara woke before sunrise, her boots already beside the bed as if sleep had only been an intermission. She didn't need an alarm. The urgency lived in her chest. By the time the rooster crowed, she was outside, jacket half-zipped, breath fogging in the chill air. The corral lay quiet under a soft mist, and the black stallion stood in the far corner, still as a statue. She approached with slow, deliberate steps. No halter, no ropes, just herself. The stallion's ears flicked, but he didn't bolt. His muscles coiled, prepared, but his eyes didn't show panic. They showed calculation, as if weighing her against 1,000 old betrayals. Clara stopped a good 10 feet away. She crouched and waited. Minutes passed. Her legs burned. The cold bit her knuckles. Still, she waited. He snorted once, sharply, stamping a hoof, but did not turn away. Clara reached in her coat pocket and withdrew an apple cut into slices. She didn't hold them out. She simply placed them on the ground and backed away. The stallion's nostrils twitched. He didn't move at first, but as Clara retreated toward the fence, his head dipped. He stepped forward, one hoof, then another, toward the apple slices. He sniffed, then with practiced suspicion, took a bite, chewed, waited, then ate another. From the fence rail, Clara watched, barely daring to breathe. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. Hank stepped out, sipping coffee, eyes tired but alert. "He eaten?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Progress?" he muttered. "Tiny, terrifying progress." Clara glanced at him. "I don't think he hates people. I think he's just never had a reason to trust one." Hank leaned on the fence, thoughtful. You're betting everything on that theory, kid. I know. The stallion finished the last slice and looked up, his ears tilted back, not pinned, just cautious. He didn't bolt this time. He didn't threaten. That was day 1. By day 3, he let her sit at the edge of the corral while he circled slowly, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. She never approached. She never forced. She simply stayed present. Every morning, every evening. She named him Ash, not because of his color, but because of what she saw in his eyes. Not fire, but what fire left behind. A soul burned down to embers, quiet and dangerous. Hank didn't protest the name. He'd seen men come back from war with that same smoldering gaze. On day 5, Clara tried to halt her, not to put on, but just to let Ash see it. She hung it on the fence, sat near it, let the wind carry its scent. Ash eyed it wearily, staying several feet away, but he didn't panic. It was more than she hoped for. Progress came in inches. She charted them like constellations. First touch, first approach, first time he didn't bolt when she moved too quickly. Hank watched it all from a distance. He never stepped into the pen, never offered advice unless asked, but every evening he was there, watching. "Reminds me of your mother," he said one night as they sat on the porch. Clara looked up from her notebook, where she was logging the day's progress. Really? She wasn't a horse girl. He chuckled. But she had that same look, like she was born to fix what others gave up on. Clara smiled faintly. "I barely remember her." "You were 6, he said softly. "Cancer's a cruel thief." Silence stretched between them. "I remember her laugh," Clara said at last, "and how she used to sing when we cleaned the kitchen." Hank nodded, sipping his tea. "She'd be proud of you." The word struck a place Clara had kept sealed. She blinked quickly and returned her notebook. On day 10, Ash allowed the halter to slip over his nose. It wasn't perfect. He flinched and backed up twice, but he didn't explode. He let her tighten it gently, with trembling fingers. And when it was secure, she didn't try to lead him. She just stood beside him, hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Good boy," she whispered. "You're doing so good." Ash exhaled a long breath, muscles relaxing by fractions. The next few days followed a rhythm. Halter on, short walks around the corral, soft commands, small trust exercises. Clara's voice became his compass, her touch a signal, her presence a balm. But not everyone saw it that way. Word had spread in town about the girl and the wild stallion. One afternoon, as Clara worked Ash through his first lead exercises outside the corral, a rusted pickup pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a man in polished boots and a jacket too clean for real work. "Toby Harker," he announced as he approached. "I own the Whispering Pines facility." Clara blinked, not recognizing the name. Hank stepped outside the barn, jaw tight. Harker smiled, thin and rehearsed. "Heard you picked up one of the BLM's problem horses. Impressive. Figured I'd drop by, see if maybe I could take him off your hands." Clara stiffened. "He's not for sale. Easy, sweetheart. Not looking to buy, just thought I'd help. That kind of animal's dangerous. Could hurt you bad. How about handlers' facilities? He'd be managed properly." Hank crossed his arms. "We're managing just fine." Harker's smile faded. "Suit yourselves. But if he gets loose or hurts somebody, don't expect the county to look the other way. That horse has a record." He turned and walked back to his truck. Before he left, he added, "Nice animal, though. Real shame what'll happen when he snaps." The words lingered like a foul stench. That evening, Clara stood at the corral watching Ash graze near the fence. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from anger. Doubt crept in, insidious. Hank joined her after a while. "You don't have to prove anything to that man," he said. Clara didn't look away from Ash. "It's not about him. I know. But just remember, this horse isn't a trophy. He's not some redemption story you owe the world." She nodded. "He's just Ash, and I want him to know what it feels like to be safe." In the following days, they pushed boundaries carefully. Clara introduced him to the saddle, first by letting him sniff it, then by draping it gently across his back. No cinches, no stirrups yet, just a feel. Ash tolerated it with uncertainty, flinching now and then, but never fighting. Each milestone brought a sense of triumph, but also a creeping weight, because the closer they got to what others called success, the more Clara wondered if Ash was meant for anything more than the quiet life they were building. One morning, after leading Ash through a creek behind the property, his first exposure to running water, Clara noticed something odd. Ash's stride had a hitch, subtle but real, a favoring of his left rear leg. She stopped him, crouched, and inspected his hoof. Nothing obvious. "Hank," she called. "Can you come take a look?" Hank examined the leg with practiced hands. "Old injury," he muttered. "Healed wrong. Might have been a break, probably in the wild. Could be arthritis setting in. Will it get worse?" "Depends," he said, "but don't expect him to be a jumper or a racer. That leg won't take that kind of strain." Clara looked at Ash, who stood patiently, eyes calm. "He doesn't have to run," she said softly. "He just has to be." The days turned into weeks. The trust between them deepened into something unspoken. Ash began to meet her at the fence in the mornings. He whinnied when she approached. He allowed her to touch his face, clean his hooves, even brush the scarred places others had avoided. And then one afternoon, Clara swung into the saddle. Not for long, just a few minutes. No reins, no pressure. Just the two of them breathing together beneath the wide-open sky. Ash didn't buck. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there, still and solid beneath her. Hank watched from the porch, pride hidden beneath his weathered face. As Clara slid down and stroked Ash's neck, she whispered, "You did it." But inside, she knew it wasn't over, because trust, like glass, could shatter with a single careless move. And men like Toby Harker weren't finished, not by a long shot. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the fields, Clara looked toward the horizon. Whatever came next, she and Ash would face it together. A week later, Clara was mucking out the barn when the call came. Hank answered it on the old rotary phone in the kitchen, his voice low and clipped, the way it always got when trouble walked through the front door. By the time Clara came in, wiping her hands on her jeans, his face was set like carved stone. "What is it?" she asked. He hung up, slow and deliberate. That was animal control. Her heart leapt to her throat. "Ash, not yet, but they've had a formal complaint filed. Multiple ones, actually, claiming he's dangerous, that he was illegally adopted. They're sending someone out to inspect the property." "Illegally? That's a lot." Her voice shook. "I filled out every form. I followed every rule." Hank rubbed the back of his neck, jaw tightening. "Doesn't matter. If someone with enough money and the right name wants to stir up trouble, they'll find a reason or make one." Clara's breath quickened. "Harker?" He nodded. "Most likely." The rest of the day passed in a haze of preparation. Clara cleaned the corral, scrubbed the water trough, checked the tack and halter, made sure every permit and document was in a neat folder on the kitchen table. Ash watched her from his paddock, sensing her unease but unable to name it. When the inspector arrived the next morning, he was polite, clipboard in hand, but his eyes moved like a man who'd already made a decision. Clara showed him everything, walked him through Ash's feeding routine, his training log, the vet records. Ash stood calmly during the exam, even allowed the man to check his hooves. The inspector made notes, asked a few pointed questions, and left with a vague promise to file the report with the county. 2 days later, the letter came, notice of review and temporary suspension of animal custody rights. Clara stood frozen on the porch steps, reading and rereading the words as if they would change by sheer will. They didn't. "They're coming for him," she whispered. Hank took the letter, scanning it. "They want to move him to a holding facility until the review is complete, which means he goes back into the system." "They can't," she said, voice cracking. "He'll shut down again, or worse." "They're not interested in what's best for him, Clara. They're interested in covering their own backs. I won't let them take him." Hank looked at her long and hard. "Then you'd better be ready to fight." The next day, Clara drove into town with a stack of flyers and a head full of resolve. She visited every vet clinic, feed store, and school she could think of. She told Ash's story to anyone who'd listen, about how he'd been broken, discarded, and slowly, patiently brought back from the edge. She posted online, shared pictures, made videos. She called journalists, wrote letters, knocked on doors. To her surprise, people responded. A local news outlet picked up the story, A photographer came to the ranch, capturing an image of Ash gently pressing his forehead to Clara's, two silhouettes framed by the pink burn of sunrise. The photo went viral. Suddenly, Ash wasn't just a horse. He was a symbol. Support poured in, letters from former soldiers who said Ash reminded them of comrades who'd survived combat. Parents of children with trauma who understood the slow, sacred process of healing. Ranchers, trainers, veterans, children. But so did the opposition. Parker released a statement painting Clara as naive and reckless, accusing her of endangering the community. He cited Ash's past aggression, twisting facts into a narrative that suited his purpose. Then came the county hearing. It was held in a modest government building with beige walls and an old flag hanging lopsided in one corner. Clara stood at the front of the room beside her lawyer, hands trembling slightly. Across from her sat Harker, smug in a tailored suit, flanked by two officials from Whispering Pines. Ash, of course, wasn't allowed. The board asked questions, reviewed documents, watched testimony, some pre-recorded, some live. Yvette spoke on Clara's behalf, describing Ash's transformation as nothing short of remarkable. Hank spoke too, his voice thick with pride and warning. She earned that horse's trust, he said, and that horse gave her something back. You take them apart now, and you'll destroy them both. Harker's lawyer countered with clinical jargon and polished smiles. He spoke of liability, precedent, and the irresponsibility of allowing emotional investment to cloud public safety decisions. Clara stepped forward last. She didn't speak like a lawyer. She didn't speak like a rancher. She spoke like a girl who'd poured her heart into something no one else believed in. I didn't save Ash, she said, voice quiet but clear. He saved me. After my mom died, I felt like everything I touched fell apart. Ash didn't need someone perfect. He needed someone who wouldn't leave. And I stayed. I'll always stay. Not because I need to win some case, but because he finally knows what it's like to be safe. The room fell silent. The board recessed to deliberate. Clara waited on the courthouse steps with Hank, staring at the sky, arms crossed tightly. After 2 hours, they were called back in. The lead board member, a stern woman with graying hair, cleared her throat and read the verdict aloud. In consideration of all evidence and testimony presented, the board finds insufficient cause to remove the animal known as Ash from the current owner's care. The temporary suspension of custody is hereby lifted, and full custody is reinstated. Clara didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. Then the air whooshed from her lungs like wind through a canyon. Harker stood, lips pressed tight, and walked out without a word. Outside, Clara broke down, sinking to her knees in the courthouse grass, tears spilling freely. Hank knelt beside her, wrapping her in one arm. You did it, he whispered. You held your ground. Back home, Ash was waiting at the gate, ears pricked, eyes bright. When Clara approached, he pressed his head into her chest and closed his eyes. That night, Hank poured 2 glasses of cider and raised one. To second chances, he said. Clara clinked her glass gently against his. To never giving up. The months that followed were quiet and rich with purpose. Clara continued Ash's training, not to prepare him for shows or events, but to strengthen his confidence. They explored trails, crossed shallow rivers, even visited a nearby school where children with learning difficulties read aloud to him. He stood still for each one, head lowered, listening. One spring afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small plaque made of wood and iron, and a simple note. You taught me what patience can do. Keep going. The plaque read, Ash stood when he could have run. Clara mounted it on the fence post beside the corral. It caught the light each morning, casting long shadows across the grass. One evening, as Clara groomed Ash under the setting sun, Hank came by with a worn envelope in his hand. Found this in your mom's things, he said. Meant to give it to you a while back. Clara opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, faded but intact. Her mother's handwriting danced across the page. My dearest Clara, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've grown into the woman I always believed you'd become. I hope you found something or someone who makes your heart steady. Someone wild and wonderful. Someone worth waiting for. If so, hold on with both hands. Love always, Mom. Clara pressed the paper to her heart, then looked at Ash. I did, she whispered. I really did. This story is a powerful reminder that miracles happen when we open our hearts to the impossible. Whether it's reuniting with a forgotten companion or simply showing kindness to those in need, these moments teach us that no one is beyond saving. If this tale touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, resilience, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can still shine. And let us know in the comments, what lesson did you take away from Emma and Blaze's journey? Thank you for joining us today. And remember, sometimes the smallest sparks ignite the brightest flames.